different aspects. I was telling Gabby that depending on how our conversation goes, we might be able to get more than one byline out of this, or maybe a blog post. It just, let's keep that in mind. If you find that, we're just covering too much territory in a single call, we can absolutely do that.
Great.
So, I sent you some questions, and if they look okay to you, we can start with the first one, and we'll just see where the conversation takes us.
Sounds good.
All right. So the first one really, concerns our overall theme, our single big idea. And that is, how are cognitive technologies impacting the future of new product introductions?
Got it. Okay, so let me start off, and then I'd love to have Richard chime in as well. The fundamental thing is, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so if you look at where we are today compared to, a decade ago and how things were done, there's a few things that are happening. The first thing is that in most industries, product life cycles are getting shorter, right, as a general pattern. And you can't afford to build a product and sell it for a really long time, right? And because there's plenty of dynamics with changes to technology, consumer patterns, industrial buying patterns, they're changing. They're much more dynamic in nature. So the life cycles in the past, were pretty long, and now we're seeing on an average, customers are significantly reducing that product life cycle time frame before they have to come up with the next generation of products. So what that is driving is that there are more new products, and from a pipeline standpoint, that need to be in the funnel. The speed of product development also has to significantly increase, because you cannot afford to be behind from a time to market standpoint, or you lose competitive advantage as a result. So as that shrinks, and that whole time to market dimension has a whole new meaning now compared to the past, it adds a lot of stress to organizations. Now, what has also happened is, over the years, you've had teams that work together on developing and launching products being much more distributed in nature than in the past. The engineering organization could be in one continent, the sourcing organization could be in another continent, or sometimes located close by, or even if they're in an adjacent building. That it creates a barrier to communication and barrier to making faster decisions. The second piece we're also seeing is that there is, even though you may have a higher investment in a certain organization, let's say you have 1,000 engineers, to support them, for example, from a new product sourcing standpoint, the sourcing organization may only be about 10 people to support them. And so they're not really able to, spend the required time influencing those decisions or adding value as well. So when you're faced with this scenario of shorter product life cycle where time to market becomes, super critical, you have a lot more iterations that are going on in the design changes in that time frame. You have distributed teams, and you have resource challenges. The traditional ways of how you approach this, are so big constraints that they've created the opportunity for these cognitive technologies to come in and be able to bridge that. So bridging from better collaboration to actually making better decisions in a faster, and faster decisions. So there is a massive opportunity, and which is why Leverida has embarked in this specific journey, and we are coming in from the sourcing angle, because oftentimes we see that during development, the time it takes to find the right supplier, to find the right part, to optimize cost, to reduce risk, and do that with every iteration of design change, and orchestrating that across the multiple functions located in different places is a massive challenge. And with technology, with cognitive technology that helps identify those opportunities and risks, turn it into specific actions and helping close those actions with these teams, we truly believe that we can improve the time to market, we can improve the gross margin of a corporation with better costs, and also reduce risks down the line by making the right sourcing decisions.
I muted myself. Thanks. That's a great summation. Richard, do you want to add anything to that?
The only thing I would add is that in addition to product life cycles shortening by industry, you see this pattern over the last 10, 15 years, you're also seeing product complexity increasing dramatically. And it's kind of a double-edged, double whammy basically. With product complexity, you're seeing both density of the number of parts or components that go into an average product, as well as more integrated digital products and services. So there's a transformation of, for example, electronics, input in sensors, for example, on traditionally industrial equipment or machinery that is increased complexity, and that just magnifies the compression that's happening around both global teams needing to collaborate and orchestrate on more, complex decisions and trade-off decisions for every new product introduction on shorter, at a shorter pace.
Right. Okay. Why don't we transition now and talk specifically about the early prototyping portion of product development. How does AI-enabled analysis give enterprises the agility and flexibility to lock in costs early on?
Well, one of the fundamental things is decisions that are made during the new product cycle, especially upstream, as early upstream that you make the decision and you make the right decision at that time frame, significantly impacts the product during the life cycle of the product. And so once you get it into manufacturing and you're getting into the sustaining mode, it's really difficult to change design, to find new suppliers, to buy costs, etc. So it becomes super important that the right discipline, the right decisions are made as early as possible. So when we think about early prototyping of the new product, there's a few things that typically design engineers do. They either look at an existing product and previous bill of material that they want to go change a few things as a base for the new product as the next generation, or they go ground up and build a new product. Now, at this stage, because it's that conceptual stage and early design, there is a lot of iteration with not a whole lot of good data. There's I hear some background noise. Okay, great. Okay, so going back to the point I was making around early decisions. So when imagine engineers having the ability of very quickly taking an existing product and trying to see with some design changes, the ability to simulate a specific product, what it would cost, what sources you could use for building that product, what kind of risk that you can build into it, and doing that in a way that AI technology can, from the beginning of that process, from loading because it's conceptual, it's expected to have a bunch of issues with respect to classification and so on. But imagine AI capability that can help you clean up that bill of material, so you're working on the right set of information. Secondly, once you have the information in the system, you are able to very quickly identify suggestions on what suppliers or what parts to use. If there's an alternate part that the system can suggest and the AI agent can suggest, that could be, a better fit from a cost and risk standpoint. Suggesting suppliers to use for that based on performance. And then taking that further and basically helping to also predict what cost, if you choose that specific part and supplier, et cetera, what cost they could expect over the life cycle of the product or the next 1 year, 2 years, et cetera, to help with the analysis of the program viability. And then, actually actioning, getting costs from the suppliers and helping with the negotiation process associated with that in a very, hands-off way, but doing this in a highly efficient way, also helps in reducing some of the time to market in terms of getting information, negotiating, and finalizing a supplier part, et cetera, as well. So those are some of the dimensions where the AI capability can help with better information by helping in the cleansing process as well as the visibility, and then followed by helping with the identification of risk and opportunity and helping with the supplier and part choice, and also helping you make decisions based on predictive information on whether that specific choice will meet your overall goals for the product, and then helping in executing and cementing the pricing as well as some of the sourcing decisions that are made in a very effective manner. Richard, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would call attention to is that what we're doing in applying AI to new product introduction is really revolutionary, but an extension, an evolution of methodology around target costing, which is, initially was led by the automotive industry, both the United States and Japan, and it was a key reason for the early on from the 60s through the early 90s, the Japanese automotive industry, particularly Toyota and Nissan's ability to have a competitive advantage against their U.S. and European competitors. And it was a methodology that was really looking at market conditions, the expected target selling price, and then a target margin, and then working backwards from that to identify what the constraints around the allowable cost would be, and then that driving cost reduction strategies. And then basically building up and working with suppliers to understand component target level costing and alignment. And that methodology, while generally relatively mature in most industries and in core manufacturing, from automotive, industrial to high tech, what we're doing though is shifting that process, enabling it to work much faster, but also providing a predictive, forward-looking view, which is really one of the most challenging elements of the traditional approach to target costing, which is based on either assumptions of what a component or a subassembly cost could be, or based on a theoretical model of like a teardown analysis and value engineering models. It's actually operationalizing based on real market intelligence, real feedback from suppliers, a much more intelligent view of all the different cost drivers that could impact not just the cost at launch, but the life cycle of that product over time. And, most industries now face a lot of competition based on margin and cost, as well as quality and time to market. And so, this additional capability to accelerate and improve the intelligence around target costing, is a core part of driving competitive advantage for most companies. And it's an area that, in a lot of ways, the innovation over the last 15 to 20 years in product lifecycle management, in design for manufacturing, even very cool stuff around augmented reality, using 3D models of products to provide guidance for, technicians and, installation and support for products or simulation of products, has massively advanced. I mean, we've seen just incredible innovation in the last 15 years, but what's been left behind is actually going back to the cross-functional enablement of the new product introduction process and the intelligence around cost. And so we really feel like we're driving back to the core mission when product lifecycle management, PLM, was defined as a discipline area is basically based on cross-functional collaboration, based on an outside-in market-based view across the sort of value chain, right? So meaning working with suppliers and partners, that vision really was never realized. And we think that, the time has come back around to extending that core vision of PLM that was established in the late 90s and early 2000 timeframe, and get back to it, because that's really where we think the biggest impact on competitiveness, margin, profitability, financial value, et cetera, of the life cycle of the products really needs to, that's the next area of leverage for many companies.
So are you saying, in effect, that AI-enabled analysis is most valuable in the early prototyping phase?
Well, I think there's this distinction between ideation, right, which is really going from concept, looking at maybe some first-level principles around core design. If it's a consumer-based product or if it's a business-based product, what are the core needs and requirements? And then that moves into, from early prototype into a design bill of material. So it may not be fully complete, but there's been specification of the actual physical design of the product and selection of key components that go into the assembly or into the operation or build of that product. And that's really where this, MPI target costing analysis and trade-off analysis and phase gate review, really, that's where we kick in. So there's kind of, some capabilities in product design that's called generative design. It's very interesting, where AI has been, recently applied to look at, give an AI engine some top level specifications for like a chair, like how much, weight it needs to support, its core basic outline of shape or design. And then what you get are these weird generative design models that are like lattice structures. They look like bone structures or something, because they're optimizing for the lowest level of material usage to support that design requirement. That's really cool stuff, and that's getting a lot of attention among the engineering community, and it's a hot topic, right? And generative design is really interesting at that early phase of ideation concept. But as soon as you transition past that stage, there's this gap where you're trying to look at the life cycle of all risk and costs and the trade-offs between them, and selecting the right suppliers, the right supply locations, the right part attributes, the right qualification for suppliers and parts. It's really complicated, right? Particularly if you have bills of material that are have hundreds of different parts and 3 or 4 layers of a bill of material with specifications that go down couple tiers in the supply chain. all of a sudden that far exceeds the ability of any engineering team or small MPI team to understand and absorb all the potential factors that need to be considered in that trade-off analysis. And that's really the gap that we're filling, is going from, post-prototype into early design, trade-off analysis before release to manufacturing.
Great, thank you for that. That is a great explanation. Looking ahead to question number 3, I think we've already touched on this. Let's think about the procurement professional, and we've talked about these folks before, the challenges that they face individually. So can we restate some of the cost optimization benefits in terms of how the procurement professionals benefit directly?
I think fundamentally there's, the opportunity for procurement professionals to be able to provide multiple options from a supplier standpoint by helping discover additional suppliers that may have different costs, or the ability to influence alternate parts that could be more cost effective, and capability in the product that helps in identifying those alternatives, both from a part and supplier standpoint. The second thing that is an opportunity is by having market intelligence available to them on a pertinent basis and an on-demand basis. They're able to understand what should they be paying for a specific part at the point of selection, as well as down the road through predictive technology, so that they can make those decisions accordingly and negotiate. And also there are opportunities where they can use some of the latest advances in negotiation playbooks, and smart RFX type of capability that allows them to negotiate better with suppliers, even in the new product phase, that helps to drive costs. Now, one of the big things is during early supplier selection, part selection, etc., the point I was making about not being able to help influence engineers who are located in a different place, are 10x more than the size of the team. By using technology, what they're able to do is provide, specific guidance on which suppliers to use, which parts the engineer should be looking at on a scalable basis and a consumable basis, but also be able to be in the tent, so to speak, of the project and getting the visibility on what stage of development it is, as well as what actions they need to take early on to be able to influence the costs ahead in the cycle, where the leverage with the suppliers is much more stronger at that point in time, because the supplier has not been selected yet, than post the selection trying to get better costing. So by having this capability upfront and collaborating with the design engineers, they are going to do a much better job in cost performance at the product level than not having that capability today.
Makes a lot of sense. We've talked about how they can earn a seat at the table, that sort of thing. It seems to me that this capability really does empower them and make them key to the process.
Yeah, I think that's the angle I would just emphasize is, from a personal and from a professional agenda, sourcing professionals and leaders within strategic sourcing teams are highly frustrated by being asked to do more with less, to be both tactical and chase parts and, manage escalations related to a specific supplier, but then also be strategic all the time, right? Which is having a strategic point of view around sourcing strategy, commodity strategy, and then execute sourcing events with the best data-driven insights that they can. that's a pressure cooker, right? And then if you just add in the mix, right, increased complexity around MPI, where they're not invited at the table or they're brought in very sporadically, it's very frustrating because there are decisions which they may or may not be fully involved in, which constrain them over managing their overall strategy with those suppliers or for a commodity group or even the life cycle of the product cost, because somewhere between 40 to 80% of the life cycle costs of a new product are locked in the design phase. And so, there's really limited room for maneuverability. And oftentimes they feel like they're, inheriting or being handed, a bag of, limited bag of options, right? And being asked to solve the problems that were made by those engineering MPI teams. I'll just give you one anecdote. One of our customers, one of the big issues is end of life. So certain parts or components have a life cycle for usage. And the end of life targeting for those by suppliers will vary. So in last year's new product, they may have looked at the bill of material at the third level of the BOM. They don't care about these parts or components. They're worried about on time, greatest design, greatest quality. That's the engineering mindset, right? So they just want to reuse, keep life simple, reuse what they used before that seemed all just fine. But they go back a year or 18 months, right? Well, the market's shifted around those parts and those suppliers dramatically. In one customer example, they had a kind of an IC chip that was selected that was going end of life within 6 months after the product launch, that they had to spend $20 million requalifying another supplier for a piece part that was about $2 for like a $300 product, the cost for that product. So it was less than 1%, but it cost them $20 million because at launch they were already upside down. And those are the kinds of little nightmares that sourcing professionals and their leaders hate. When we did our cognitive sourcing study for 2018, and we're going to ask the same questions to leaders in 2019, 90+% said that they were looking for a dedicated environment that MPI teams would use along with themselves to understand full life cycle costs for products, right? That they share a common platform information model. The second point was that we heard constant feedback that they're very frustrated. 67% believe that they lack empowerment and visibility to decisions which are made in the MPI process. So bridging that gap is not just about better outcomes for the business or better process design. It's really at a personal level, a shift in level of empowerment, level of visibility, level of control that many sourcing professionals really want and desire because they're set up to a really high standard and they feel like they can't hit those stretch goals or have all the answers and information that they need, or that their expertise is just being ignored, right, in these situations. So, that's the personal side of it. It's really a big impact when a transformation that leverages AI around MPI can bridge those gaps and those challenges.
Yeah, I can understand so clearly. That is just so huge. And in fact, you're kind of touching on the themes that I was getting at with question number 4, and that is kind of shifting our focus to the end of the development process. How does AI-enabled sourcing help with last-minute changes?
Mm-hmm.
I think fundamentally, if you look at it, and the capability, for example, that we are looking at as well, you are providing options from alternate suppliers, alternate parts. You are flagging risk. It could be a risk, as Richard was talking about, an end-of-life risk that essentially the part is no longer going to be produced while the product has a longer life cycle than the part. Whether it is financial risk that exists with a specific supplier, whether they're going to be in business during the product life cycle or not, whether it is related to a specific technology that is getting replaced or is at the last life stages, whether it is also choosing a supplier with manufacturing location, which is a high tariff implication, and that needs to be considered early on. So by having all that information in the database, in the system, available in terms of showing the potential risk, showing the options for mitigating that risk, showing the opportunities and the opportunities to and specific helping in actioning them, you give the ability for the users, whether it's engineers or procurement professionals, that they could make that decision during, as early as they can, but also when the time comes that they have to make the decision, they have the alternatives, they have the ability to make those in a much faster way than previously possible, with AI helping identify it faster as well as actioning it faster based on decisions that are teed up for these users. Richard?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the issue of last minute changes, there's both, we're just seeing in general more volatility in supply markets, broadly speaking, than we've ever seen before. And it's coming from multiple directions, as you identify in question 5. It's coming from, dynamics around supplier capacity, around complexity of parts and components and what drives their life cycle, raw material cost, input pressures, tariff changes. All of those changes, dynamics, right, could, if a new product introduction process is taking, 4 to 6 months, a lot can happen in 4 to 6 months now. I mean, it used to be relatively stable. There may be a few things that you're really looking at with some strategic suppliers. You're really collaborating with them on, final design requirements and testing. But now you've got to have almost 100% precision across every level of the design of the product and be up to date, and constantly, assessing what's happening in the market, not just today, but what's most likely to happen, in the near term or over the entire life of the product. And that bar is raised so high that, these last minute changes could be driven by an internal design change where you quickly need to reevaluate what's the impact of that, right? And that's that ability to kind of look at that in isolation, but also across the entire roll-up of the previous version of the design or the bill of material and compare that to the new one. But it's also coming externally from new dynamics where you need quick answers and trade-off analysis and recommendations to assess changes that are happening all the time while you're going through the design phase. And, we've reached a tipping point, I would argue, that no one human, no one team of 4 or 5 cross-functional professionals, can scan and understand all the relevant data points of insight that are relevant in these markets, and particularly throughout the design phase. And so you need this AI-based capability to scale the scope dimension and then provide recommendations, automatically over time, rather than just relying on past knowledge, human expertise, tribal knowledge, and the feedback from typically a very small set of suppliers who are directly involved in the design of that new product.
Okay, great. Let's look at this list, all of the pressures facing manufacturers. First of all, let me know if you agree with this list. It sounds like probably you do. And then can you identify the largest problem facing manufacturers? Is there one thing that really keeps them up at night?
I'll take a shot at that, Rajesh.
Okay.
The way I look at it is that there's kind of two buckets. There are the traditional challenges which remain pretty consistent over the last 15, 20 years. And number one, that's related to quality, risk, and understanding the constant challenge of having accuracy around forecast, right? The demand planning, because inherently at new NPI stage, you've got a huge range of possible outcomes. You don't really know what the competitive response is. You may not know what the real demand pattern is going to look like. You're going to launch, hope for the best, and then sort of see what happens, right? And that's massively compounded in consumer electronics. It's less of an impact in kind of B2B products with more established markets that are kind of have more of a run rate business demand pattern. But generally speaking, those are kind of the two biggest issues, because quality incursion events are the number one supply chain disruptions that most companies face. It's not the hurricane, issue. It's the day-to-day, not hitting yields, having a testing problem, having a problem with the tooling, at a supplier, et cetera. So that's the first bucket, right? And that's just the ongoing challenges and changes, right? So, but what's these issues call out new sources of volatility that are compounding those issues, and that's really where we think new intelligence needs to, a new speed and agility is required. I'd say the number one issue relates to the design for supply chain, not just design for manufacturing. So what I mean by that is you've got increasingly dynamics where you need to think very carefully about not just supplier selection and part selection, but also the source of supply, because of the dynamics around tariffs, geopolitical uncertainty, the cost to qualify a supplier and or shift to a new location is incredibly high. So those are going to be your most costly, quote unquote, mistakes or bets that you're going to make over time. And every new product introduction is kind of is in some way is a chance to review that and make new bets, right? Because you kind of qualify in new suppliers, maybe that have equivalent products or quality that's required, and then qualify them in at the NPI phase. So the ability to have really intelligent, new product introduction sourcing processes that are very agile and efficient then becomes really important as a response to making bigger bets. But that's kind of my personal take. Rajesh, what are your thoughts?
That makes sense. We also have a lot more market dynamic changes, from commodity pricing to supply challenges, as well as tariffs, etc., which are much more dynamic in nature now than in the past. So figuring out how manufacturers can balance the supply challenges and the cost pressures while supporting their customers in a much more dynamic fashion has become, I think, a major issue. And so the expectations from the customers, obviously, when they're building product and selling to their customers, is that they're able to have their supply chain be increasingly agile in today's world. And that pressure of those agility requirements is requiring the suppliers to be more dynamic in nature, sometimes having to improve their risk management capabilities in their supply chains, to strategies that they need to adopt around inventories and production. And so what we're seeing today is, suppliers and manufacturers are, looking to drive more of that agility. However, we are also seeing that the traditional way of how they approach things make this really difficult to implement, right? It's not just throwing more people at it. And so more and more using technology to understand and identify as soon as you find a risk or an opportunity out there, how are you able to act on it and develop that agility within the organization to act on that is becoming increasingly important. And the good news is there's technology like what Leverita provides and other players that helps them in bridging that gap. But it requires a certain amount of change management, to really truly transform. But we are seeing evidence of many corporations beginning to invest in that capability. And I think in going forward, the difference between competitive advantage and not having competitive advantage is truly building that agility, within the organization and in their supply chain to react to this type of volatile marketplace that is going to be the norm going forward.
That's a great summation. And I think that is what I was hoping to hear with question number 6. If you think in terms of the concluding paragraph of the article, how does using AI-enabled procurement change the game? And I think you just answered that question. Is there anything else you want to add along those lines?
Richard, your thoughts?
I mean, I think that's a great summary, Rajesh. I mean, the only call to action I would say is, if a chief procurement officer, a strategic sourcing leader, or even a chief supply chain officer, wants to promote and understand, the more of a strategic role, leadership role for their strategic sourcing direct materials team. Our point of view is it's really in this area of extending into and influencing and guiding improved MPI outcomes and cross-functional coordination in that area.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, there's fundamentally what we have seen, through this evolution of the marketplace is there is a need for greater velocity, whether it is shrinking time to market or it's the speed at which you make decisions and act on it, to the ability to be agile, where when you're faced with a constraint and risk, etc., that you have built the organization and the capability for you to change your decisions in light of the new environment and make new decisions. And so today, the ability to do that with just people is not going to work. And with the applied AI technologies that are coming into play, that is building that capability. And technology doesn't do all the work for you, but also having an organization that is able to leverage what the capabilities out there from the technology and turning it into action and execution is going to make the difference in the battle for competitive advantage. The other piece that I would also mention is when you look at, they say prevention. What is that thing that they say? Prevention is better than, what is the proverb? I forget. Better than cure, right?
Right. Prevention is, 10 times or I don't know. Right.
So there's a proverb, prevention is better than cure. So it's very apt in the new product introduction space. Because if you have this kind of AI capability upstream during new product development, you're going to prevent some of those issues by making the right decisions upfront rather than spinning the cycles to cure that down the road when that event happens, if you had made that wrong decision, which cost the company a lot more. So essentially what we are trying to do is enable that capability such that you make the right decisions for the company upfront and not pay the price down the road.
Perfect. Yes. Okay, great. Just moving on and shifting gears a little bit, an editor will typically like personal examples. So just thinking about your recent NPI solution development, what lessons did you all learn along the way?
I think there's a few interesting points as we've talked to prospects during the research stage of this. We've talked to folks in different industries, different sizes of companies. It was actually interesting that there is a distinct common set of problems, and it's a pattern, right? And what they have is the same issues of what we talked about: collaboration, firstly starting with shared visibility of all the decision makers, the people that are supposed to be involved in making certain decisions during your product. That level of visibility has been a struggle for the organizations. And what I've alluded to before, where resource allocations and investment within the organization is different with different functions, as well as the global disbursement of teams have exacerbated that situation. So every no matter what size, we're seeing that as an issue. The second thing we're also seeing as we went through this conversation is all of this is primarily done the traditional way. You may have tools like PLM, depending on the size of the company, as well as design tools that you may be using. But there is very little AI-based decision making within the organization, which provides a massive opportunity in the cross-functional collaboration and decision making going forward. The market intelligence elements, again, are not widely used today, but it's fragmented. And there's a general consensus that having the kind of relevant information for better cost optimization, supplier selection, risk mitigation upfront would be of value for the companies. And so the point I was trying to make around that is that no matter the size of the company, no matter which vertical they are, they have a common set of new product introduction space, which basically told us that this is truly a large problem with a large opportunity, that applied AI can really move the needle and help enterprises improve time to market, better gross margins, and mitigate risks for the corporation in a meaningful way.
Terrific. Richard, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just from my personal experience, I was also, I spent a lot of time working with the analyst community, as part of my responsibilities. And, at Gartner Group, IDC, that cover the product lifecycle management space and innovations broadly within engineering operations. Across the board, the feedback across multiple analysts was this validation that this remains a major gap, that there's been a lack of innovation in this area, that at best, most companies view it as a practice area. So they've organized in terms of maybe a kind of a cross-functional team and like a meeting and a communication cadence. But the actual underlying information that they're using, like using a common platform, collaborating across different functions with the same information, is just a massive gap. It's Excel spreadsheets, internal intranets, and a lot of PowerPoint reporting and email. going back and forth. That is the state of the art. And it's just, I personally was just fascinated by why, just the fundamental, like, why has this area been sort of left behind? Because it's so critical, right, for outcomes for companies, as we've talked about. And I was expecting to sort of get, sort of a, well, you haven't thought about these 5 things, or, so-and-so over here has totally nailed that problem, and they've solved it 10 years ago, because when we were first ideating around this, we're like, well, we think this is, really exciting and worth going after, but let's go validate, right? Yeah, it was very few times in my career have I ever kind of gone after a new product idea area and then gotten such a clear validation from, an expert community or the analyst community around, yep, great problem to go solve. No one solved it. And it's just, we're very excited because of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key question, isn't it? Why?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that the general follow-up comment there is just, as with most things in supply chain in general, this cross-functional getting out of silos, right, and orchestrating decision-making across silos just remains a pattern challenge for many, enterprises, particularly global manufacturers that we work with that operate kind of at scale in global teams. There's just a level of complexity that can't get out of their own way. It's really hard to orchestrate this stuff, because inherently MPI is finance, engineering, supply chain, procurement and sourcing, and manufacturing, generally represented, right, in these teams, and that's inherently a hard move, for a lot of companies to resolve. But yes, I agree. It's sort of, you know what I mean? it's there have been similar cross-functional innovations around, sales and operations planning, or, working on, integrated outbound order fulfillment, or, managing global logistics and transportation across multiple suppliers and 3PLs and outsourced logistics and transportation services companies. I mean, these have been big challenges that the industry overall has made massive strides around, and there's been great innovation. This is an area that's being left behind, and we think it's wrong.
Well, you have a powerful argument, that's for sure. I think I have a lot to work with here. That's an understatement, in fact. Is there anything that we did not touch on that you think we should include?
Well, the only thing I would just share is that we do have the recording we did a couple webinars on MPI, and I don't know if you have access to that, Tricia, but we can very easily just share the recording of that on YouTube for the last webinar, and you could easily, pull out some things if you felt it was useful.
Absolutely. Yes, that would be immensely helpful. So yeah, send me those and I'll review them before I start writing.
Perfect.
And the other thing, Richard, there's no hurry with this, but you mentioned Gartner, IDC. If we can include links or quote them in this piece, that would be awesome. So something to think about.
Yeah, they're so pay to play on doing that. It's really frustrating. I mean, Mickey North-Riza is our best, and Mark Halpern are the two very good targets for us to try to get quotes from.
Well, I don't need a quote necessarily. Just we can
reference third-party content information, and in the MPI webinar and in the white paper that we're working on, there is some of that third-party content. I'm gonna, Gabby, if you can help facilitate following up with Adam, because he's been sort of keeper of the flame on this stuff, and let's arm Tricia with both the draft of the MPI white paper and the link to the MPI webinar. Okay. That would be perfect.
All right, fantastic.
I'll do so after this call.
Thank you, Gabby.
I think the last time we worked together, you provided a Gartner report or two, and we were able to, lift from published reports. So
yeah. Well, that's the thing is Adam and I put together a lot of relevant third-party content that we refer to both in the webinar and in the white paper. So he's got some of those pieces. So that's a great question, and let's just make sure, Adam will immediately come to mind on, 3 or 4 things that would be worth taking a look at.
That's perfect. Just anticipating what an editor is going to be looking for, especially a Forbes editor. If we can...
Yeah, we have to reference, third-party content. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, that'll facilitate approval so much. All right, well, I don't have anything else. Do you guys want to add anything, or do you think we're done?
I'm good.
That's good. Thank you. Thanks for the time.
Thank you. As always, you guys are so quotable. You make my job much easier. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rich. I appreciate it, Gabby. Take care, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.